I'll give 1.5.
One. Yeah.
So if for 1 over to Richard, come on. If you get it right, you get 1.5.
Good.
Okay.
Begins with an M. You can only get 1 now, Richard.
Oh yeah, I got it.
Go.
Masada. Yeah, Masada.
You've got Masada, right? Okay.
Yep.
That's good. You've got that. So I'm just gonna I'm just putting this out live. So we're just gonna make sure that we've. I don't know where everybody is today. I think Bill's out and about. Dell's probably trying to deal with one of his children. I know he gets a lot of difficulties there, but that's life. I get difficulties with Richard. Oh yeah, Richard, did you get your double? Is it double glazing? Not the double glazing. Your conservatory sorted out yet?
Yeah.
Oh right, what's happened? Tell us the goss. Actually, can you tell Pat what about your conservatory in 1 minute? Go on.
So all our conservatory's been leaking the roof. We only get it only if the wind blows in a sort of northwesterly direction, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
So we only had it like 3 times in the last 3 years. So the warranty was coming up, the guarantee was running out. So I thought, well, I want them to come and sort it before the warranty runs out. So of course I ring them up in January and they decide then they can't come out till June. COVID. So then they virtually then came up and said, oh, we can't do anything now. The guarantee's up. Even though I've had this problem for 3 years, I finally, you can't even ring them up. You can only contact them by email.
Oh.
Unbelievable. So they've actually now, I sort of spoke to somebody online, you know, where you put a question in and they reply, and then you've got to reply to them and everything. So they've actually, hopefully they're going to sort it out now.
And Richard, you haven't mentioned my input. You've got to put me on this. Right. Whilst I was talking to Richard yesterday, really apologetic because we were meant to be having our little one-to-one session on a Friday, and we had to take the new van to the garage to have some maintenance sorted out on it, and my head sort of went, and then I said I was going to speak to Richard on Monday. And he said he wasn't able to get hold of me on Monday. So he spoke to me yesterday and he said, I've got this problem with the windows. So then I gave this company hell, Anglian Windows, Home Improvements. And as a representative for the local member of Parliament, I put in a complaint saying that if this isn't sorted out, it's going to be raised in the Houses of Parliament. And I think that may have helped Richard's case.
No, I haven't heard from Alan Cairns yet. So.
You haven't heard from Alan Cairns, no. So anyway, we're gonna crack on. Hang on, carry on. What did you need? You've got it. Yeah, she's got it. Is my little daughtery thing over there? She's sat at the table. There she is. Say hello. There she is. She is an actor as well. An acting pain in the ass. Right, anyway, right, so we're going to look at Masada, and it's a piece of archaeology that we would have learnt about at school, and we'd have been told at school that Masada is the place that the Romans defeated the Jews, and they put a Jewish rebellion down, and all these wonderful things. So I got just a few images today. I just want to sort of put a little bit of meat on the bones with Masada, and we go 2 ways with the slides that I've got here. So we'll share them on the screen, and we'll share now on 3, 2, 1. I've always got to be very careful to ask people, are you actually seeing anything on your screen?
Yeah, we're seeing it.
It was that bad. It was that lecture I gave last year for a whole hour. And I said, did you enjoy the lecture? And they all said yes. And one of them said, it's a shame that we only saw one image for the whole hour. And I said, you what? And I said, oh yeah, you were stuck on one image. And I said, I kept changing it. And they said, "Oh, your voice was so good, we didn't want to spoil it." Right, so there's Masada. It's
Near the Dead Sea.
yes, near the Dead Sea. It really, really is. It's south of the Dead Sea, and it's a site that you would probably only go to if you want to go there to find the site of Masada. And I feel that I haven't really mentioned this site of Masada, and it should have been one of those sites that I could have done in regards to my weekly lectures about world archaeology. But I think it would be a little bit more fitting here, and obviously if anyone wants to catch up with it, they can. So basically what we've got, I've been a bit blasé. I've said was it a Roman victory over the Jews? Was it a Jewish defeat? Was it a Jewish victory? All these questions have been put up in the Jews. Some areas of the Jewish community say that Masada, they disown the Masada event because they basically say it was a load of crackpot Jews. It's nothing to do with us real Jews. And the Romans say, well, if they weren't real Jews, it wasn't a problem, you know. Is that rather interesting thing? So I've got a few little images, and so we go both ways. We come back to this image, so we'll go left, and we'll go. We'll go. Hang on, we'll go left a minute. Hang on. And why is it not going left? Hang on a minute. I've already got a problem. Okay, yeah, here we go. Let's show this guy. Let's new share. Bingo. Now this guy, big weird curvy nose, is the one who writes the history. A trick question. With everything that I've already said, right, which I've been really blasé and I've just chucked it out there, and you know, is this guy a Jew or a Roman? And this guy wrote the history. The answer is he's Jewish, and he wrote the history about the Roman siege. So we've got to go with this guy. He's called Josephus, and that's where our information comes from in regards to Masada. So he's called Flavius Josephus. Flavius Josephus. So the siege of Masada was was a major event in Jewish history, depending on what type of Jew you are. And it's the siege of Masada was the final event of the First Jewish-Roman War. There were a number of Jewish wars, and where the Jews just disagreed with what the Romans were doing. We use the word First Jewish-Roman War. There were lots of wars involving the Jewish community between lots of people, but obviously at this point, this landscape of Jerusalem, Palestine, Jordan was all under Roman rule, and this occurred. There's lots of dates when this actually occurred. It was written down by Flavius Josephus, as we know. Did it occur in late 71 AD and ending in early 73 AD, or was it in late 73 ending in early 74? So we're about 1 year out with the dates, which isn't too bad, which isn't too terrible. Now, to give you an idea, it was around 10,000 Roman soldiers and auxiliaries and slaves and supporting staff besieging a rock known as Masada. And it was the Legion of the 10th Legion, the Fretensis Legion. Say it again, the Fretensis Legion. So it was the 10th Legion, Legion 10 Fretensis. And again, up to 10,000 versus around 1,000 that are at Masada. But Masada itself is a rock. It's an impregnable rock, and we'll just give you an idea. So we've got Josephus there, and there it is. And just looking at that, you're thinking, how the bloody hell did the Romans get into it? And what we do know is that the Romans encamped all around this site. They built fortresses all around the site, so nobody could actually get out. And we look at one or two of those fortresses today. So we look at the top there, and there's lots of buildings. And they've actually found scrolls. They found lots of little bits of archaeological evidence, and you can actually see water in the distance. But which water is this? Is that the Dead Sea? It is the Dead Sea. It's going to be the Dead Sea. So now, what I want to do is flood us with a lot of information. I'm back to this bloke, and we're going to flood us with a nice chunk of information. That information will come in the form of, now, Flavius Josephus. The only information that we got for the siege, the only single source, the only stuff that we've got other than the archaeology that's been done there, is by this guy, Flavius Josephus. He's described as a Jewish rebel leader that had been captured by the Romans within the First Jewish-Roman War, and then the Romans said, right, you obviously speak Hebrew. Yeah, obviously I'm Jewish. You can either die or you can be our official historian. And he decided to become their official historian. I don't know if that narrative was right. He was probably told, well, you're useful for us. You can work with us. Right? It's a bit like in the Second World War. There were Jewish generals in the German army in the Second World War because they were still useful. There were Jewish soldiers in the Luftwaffe, airmen in the Luftwaffe. They were allowed to serve and continued to serve in the German Luftwaffe when thousands of Jews are being killed. Right, so this guy served the Romans, and it's very interesting that we've actually got we got somebody who's on the opposite side writing the history for the winning side. That's very rare, that, because what we usually say is history is always written in the bias of the winning side. Right? In this point, very confusing. So according to Josephus, the long siege by the troops of the Roman Empire led to the mass suicide of the rebels there. The Sicarii rebels, who was actually a Jewish sect, and their families. Basically, they decided mass suicide with their families. However, this is what Josephus tells us. So Josephus writes down the Sicarii Jewish rebels with their families committed suicide. But that's not supported in the archaeological evidence. I can remember looking at this years ago. Whether we'll get to that, I don't know, because I did a 2-hour lecture on this. But that's a really interesting point. That the archaeological evidence doesn't say that we don't find the evidence of these individuals. That's very interesting. Not on that scale, anyway. The siege has become controversial, with some Jews regarding Masada as a place of reverence, commemorating ancestors who fell heroically against oppression, and other Jews regarding it as a testament to extremism and a refusal to compromise. So in other words, there's some Jews saying, hang on a minute, right? This isn't too bad. You know, the Roman world isn't too bad. You're still able to be Jewish, right? It's a lot better being Jewish than not being Jewish in Nazi Germany. Do you know what I mean? And they were saying, oh, look, you know, you live amongst the Romans, right? We'll have our day. We had our day in 1947. It will come. We will enter the promised land. You know, all that type of stuff. Yeah, it will come to us, right? And they shouldn't have held themselves up at Masada. They should have just been accepting of Roman rule, right? And others are saying, you know, they had a right to sort of to stand up against Rome. You know, the idea of the Jewish rebel and the idea of the Jew that just accepts the world that he's in. So you've got two factions there. Lozenge-shaped Table Mountain. So let's go back to that again. Let's just go back to that image. Lozenge-shaped Table Mountain. There it is. It is a table mountain, right? Roman fort. The archaeologist working. There you go. So it's quite a lot going on, really. And interesting enough, one thing that stands out amongst all of this, and very, very interesting, is the word Byzantine church. So this being a place of Jewish reverence, synagogue, a palace, another place of a palace, and suddenly you see the Byzantine church. Very, very strange that. Lozenge-shaped site. Very, very interesting site. And there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of activity. So the site could be said to be abandoned by the Jews at that point. However, later on you've got a Byzantine church. So really interesting piece of archaeology. So there they are excavating. And a Roman fort, one of the besieging Roman forts that was set around this location of Masada. The remains look very well preserved, and it's not the type of place you go up to nick a stone to sort of build a cottage a mile away. Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit of work. So this, fairly well preserved. The archaeology has told us quite a lot. But what does the archaeology tell us? This is the real big question. What do we want to learn from this today? So a lofty, isolated site that looks impregnable. Historically, the fortress could be reached only by a single pathway that was too narrow for men to walk abreast. This pathway was named the Snake for the way it twists and zigzags to the summit. So you go one way, you go back on yourself, up there, typical thing. Masada was named as the place where David rested after fleeing from his father-in-law, King Saul. So interestingly enough, this is a place of homage. This is a place that goes into the consciousness of the Jewish world. King David is living around 1,000 years BC, right? So this site is very important to the Jews 1,000 years before this siege. Yeah? Flavius Josephus, a Jewish born and raised in Jerusalem, is the only historian to provide a detailed account of the First Jewish-Roman War, the whole of the war, and the only person who recorded what happened at Masada. We're going to stop there a moment. We're really going to stop. Because that's the problem with history. If it's written by one person, you only have one point of view. Did this actually happen the way the historian tells us? If the historian did not write about Masada, didn't mention Masada, the events of Masada would have never been recorded in history. That is another important point. Not every event is recorded in history. Now, Josephus was captured at what's referred to as the siege of Yodvat. Now, the siege at Yodvat was a Roman victory, right? Josephus was captured. Now, this is really interesting. The siege of Yodvat, which is further up in modern day Israel. Interestingly enough, the siege at Yodvat involved. You'll never guess the figures on this one. This actually might make a lecture for my weekly lectures, actually. The siege at Yodvat in the year 67 years AD, which was part of this war, which was part of this Jewish war, the Roman Jewish war. These figures are quite astounding. 42,000 Jews versus 60,000 legionaries. The 42,000 Jews are held up at this locality, right? And wait for it, that figure 42, 40,000 die. Now that is, okay, we'll just basically say the death rate of over 90%, right? Who writes the history? We're not doing any further with that. However, one of the people that survives is this Josephus bloke. He wrote about this. Josephus writes about this earlier battle, this earlier siege at Yodvat, and he writes, now Vespasian was very desirous of demolishing Yotapa, for he had gotten intelligence that the greatest part of the enemy had retired hither, and that it was on other accounts a place of great security to them. So in other words, this is where they went, Yodvat. the Roman army surrounded them, led by the then Roman general Vespasian, right? And then eventually you see the likes of Vespasian becoming the great emperor of the Roman world. But that's a few years to come. So this guy, Josephus, is telling us a lot. A death rate at Yodvat of 90% of the Jews there is quite incredible, and I'm sure we agree. Back to Masada. This is where Josephus was captured. He was lucky to survive because most of his mates were actually enslaved. This was in a way the destruction of the Jewish army, most of the Jewish army. Josephus presumably based his narration on the field commentaries, not only of his own word. Basically, he sat down with Vespasian, wrote down some of Vespasian's accounts of what was going on with all these other events as well. According to Josephus, Masada was first constructed as a fortification 100 years ago, 31 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Herod the Great fortified it as a refuge for himself in the event of a revolt. So in other words, this is where the great King Herod would have gone, the great leader that is mentioned in regards to the suffering of the people of the lands of Israel, and you've got the Old Testament going into the New Testament with the birth of Jesus Christ. That Herod the Great. So what happened in 66 AD at the beginning of the first Jewish revolt? A group of Jewish extremists called the Sicarii overcame the Roman garrison at Masada and settled there. So in other words, that there was a Roman garrison at Masada and they occupied that garrison. They kicked the Romans out, and the Sicarii were there for the best part of 7 years. And the Sicarii were commanded by Eleazar ben Yahia. Eleazar ben Yahia. And Eleazar ben Yahia was a commander who would command. This would be the Sicarii and their families expelled from Jerusalem. Actually, the Jews didn't like the Sicarii, even though they were Jews. So you can see where we're going there with the politics. Eleazar ben Yahia, they occupied Masada, but lots of their families were in Jerusalem. The Jewish community said, "Hey, why are you occupying Masada and making things worse? You know, you're making us suffer. We want your families to remove themselves from Jerusalem. We want you to go somewhere else." And the Sicarii took their family as this Jewish sect, and they all occupied Masada. There were probably over 1,000 of them anyway. And then this is where we come into history. The Romans were so pissed off with the Sicarii that they actually besieged Jerusalem anyway, and destroyed the second Jewish temple. So, you know, the Jews are not doing well at this stage. It was this sect that, so the Jews are really angry. They're saying, hang on, this sect of Judaism, right? You've caused the Romans to besiege Jerusalem, right? You've caused our second temple to be destroyed because of your actions. Because you captured Masada, all of you go away. So they kicked them all out, right? According to modern interpretations of Josephus, the Sicarii were an extremist splinter group of the Zealots, and were equally antagonistic to both the Romans and other Jewish groups. So it's likely that the Jews would have supported the Romans to kick these other Jews into place, you know. So this is why they're not, in some sectors, the Jewish community don't see Masada as these people representing themselves, which makes things really, really interesting. And the Sicarii do go into the Sicarii then undertake a massacre of 700 Jews at the settlement of En Gedi, because, so in other words, the Sicarii, this Jewish sect, kill their own. So it makes looking at the siege very, very complicated, very, very complicated indeed. So now you understand why a Jewish person is writing about the siege. Could be this Jewish Josephus doesn't like the Sicarii either, and he's Jewish. And these Jewish people at Masada are meant to represent Judaism, but even the Jews don't like them. So it makes the whole siege very, very confusing. Archaeology indicates the Sicarii modified some of the structures they found there. These include a building that was modified to function as a synagogue facing Jerusalem. Although it did not contain the usual sort of indicators of a synagogue, it was definitely a synagogue. So what Josephus tells us is what we're going to look at now. But historical interpretation of what Josephus says, and we're going to move the image on a bit. Let's just move the image. What image are you looking at, guys? So I don't get confused.
Tabletop.
Yep, and we've done that one. The archaeologists and bingo. This is where the Romans come into this. And carry on. Why have you got a coat on your head? Are you still doing your stuff? You can do some more on the other side. I want you to draw the anatomy of a dissected frog.
Your face.
My face, that'll do. So a Roman fort that was actually constructed for the short period of the siege at Masada. So if you note, they were very well built. I'm sure it was like, the Romans would have had, bathing facilities, and it would be like, oh, come on, sir. Do we have to go out and sort out the Jews today? We've been here a few months. Everything's fine. Eventually, the Jews did the job of killing themselves anyway. And Sicarii did the job of killing themselves. I can hear somebody from a Jewish synagogue said, they're not real Jews. These people, they caused us all the trouble, right? And they killed our own as well. We're not really Jews. So, okay, back to what my notes say. So, it's said that Josephus' account is incomplete and inaccurate. Joseph actually writes from a bias because he's Jewish. He doesn't like the Sicarii Jews. So he's basically more on the Roman side of things. Josephus only writes of one palace. Archaeology reveals two. His description of the northern palace contains several inaccuracies, and he gives exaggerated figures to the heights of the walls and towers. Josephus' account is contradicted by the skeletons in the caves and the numerous separate fires. So what are the skeletons in the cave? What are they about? Right? And another thing as well is that we got the skeletons in the cave, but who are these individuals? Because another historian writes that there is no archaeological evidence that the Masada's defenders committed mass suicide. Who are the skeletons in the cave? What do they represent? Josephus' narrative is impossible because the Romans would have immediately pressed their advantage, leaving no time for any of what we're just about to say to occur. Right? The defenders were massacred by the Romans, were they? Now, so was there a suicide? Is there archaeological evidence for it? What are the skeletons in the cave? Was there skeletons elsewhere on the site? Did the Romans massacre the Jews? Let's just look at what Josephus tells us. So let's just look at this a little bit, right? So in 72 AD, if this is the year of the siege or it's the next year, because we're a bit of a thing with the debate, it occurred over a year. The Roman governor, Lucius Flavius Silva, what a great name, led the Roman legion of the 10th Fractensis and a number of auxiliaries and Jewish prisoners, totaling up to 10 to 15,000 men and women to lay siege to those that were at Masada, who were about 1,000. So the Jewish prisoners are important because the Jewish prisoners would have built the forts. They would have built the ramps, which would have led up to the fort as well, Masada. The Roman legions surrounded Masada and built a wall that circumnavigated the whole thing. So they built a wall. So none of the Jewish defenders could get out and they couldn't get in. Now you guys, you two, did Vercingetorix, didn't you? Where the Romans built a wall, a defensive wall around Elysee, Paris, in 54 BC. right? So that nobody could get in and nobody could get out. Job done, right? One of the things with the siege is how you conduct your siege. Do you allow people to get in and out, right? The answer is no, but that's not as simple as that. To stop anyone getting in and out, you've got to build a wall around it. Many times do we look at, well, for example, Berlin, right? The Russians didn't completely surround Berlin until probably about the 31st of April, before they marched in on the 1st to the 3rd of May 1945. And what I mean by that is that the Germans were still able to get in and out of Berlin up until very, very late. So if you're going to besiege somewhere to stop anyone getting in and out, you've got to build a wall around it. That's what they did at Masada. Before commencing construction of a siege ramp against the western face of the plateau, moving thousands of tons of beaten earth to do so, Josephus does not record any attempts by the Sicarii to counteract the besiegers during this process, a significant difference from his accounts of other sieges of the revolt. So in other words, the Sicarii seemingly don't resist. Could they already be dead? So, you know, it's that thing, you know. The Romans may have been besieging somewhere where most of the defenders may have already killed themselves. But really interesting things that, you know, what is actually going on here? Because the Sicarii, Josephus does not record the Sicarii resisting the building of this of this great ramp with thousands of tons of stone and beaten earth. Right, so if we have a little look at that, I think we've got that. Hang on a bit. If we look at that, I'm just going to quickly look at my images. Do you know what? Right, I'm moving these images back and forth, and for every couple of seconds, it seems to lose where I am. Okay, here we go. And hang on, let's just get this one up on the screen. Hang on a minute. Hang on. Right. Okay. Right. Let's show you this ramp. Hang on. It's actually shown on my plan really clearly. There it is, the ramp. That was being built. So that was being built up against the western gate. That's the ramp. So that would have had to have been built every single day. Not just hundreds of tons, hundreds of thousands of tons of stone and earth would have had to have been placed there. And the whole point, this is the way the Romans fought. They thought, right, we'll starve the buggers out for one, right? Yeah, we'll starve them out. Two, if you build a ramp, that's the least risky option. So you can eventually get into the fort of Masada with minimum risk to life. And this is what the ramp was about. This is what this western ramp was about. The western gateway. This is what this was about. This is the ramp itself, right? So this is, and the other thing as well is, it should be like that actually, because that's north, and that's east, and that's west. So the person who labelled this should have labelled it the other way around. But that is the western ramp where it is. So basically, you've got 180 degrees and put it the other way. So that's the western ramp. So right, let's have a little look at what all this sort of says. So in other words, that's the other point as well, is how many casualties did the Romans actually suffer? Right, the answer is unknown. Unknown. 7 individuals were eventually captured, 2 women and 5 children, according to Josephus. That's all that survived. 2 women and 5 children. Whether they were placed into slavery is another big question. So nobody can get in and out. The ramp took probably 6 months to complete. 6 whole months to build a frigging ramp. But no, very few of the Roman soldiers and the Jewish captured prisoners, if you want to call them slaves, very few of them would have died. So that's a good result, you know. starve the buggers out. It's a good result. That's what modern police do in a siege. We've got to limit casualties, right? So if you can possibly have a siege that goes on for 2 days and nobody dies, that's a better outcome than one person dying. Yeah. So that's today, and that was back then as well. So now my notes are telling me that it was a minimum of 3 months. I'm saying it was 6 months. So a giant siege tower with a battering ram was constructed. So in other words, now you're going to move a huge siege tower on huge wooden rollers, right? With a huge battering ram to get to the bloody gate. This is overkill, right? But this is what Josephus tells us. Josephus also tells us about other sieges and other battles in regards to the first Jewish-Roman war. And this would have been constructed and moved laboriously up the completed ramp, while the Romans assaulted the wall, discharging a volley of blazing torches against the wall of timber, allowing the Romans to finally breach the wall of the fortress. Here we go. On April the 16th at 5:15 in the year 73 AD. Or was it 74 AD? I don't know. We've got precise date there, but, April the 16th. When the Romans entered the fortress, however, they found it to be a citadel of the dead. The Jewish rebels had set all the buildings but the food store rooms ablaze and had killed each other, declaring a glorious death, preferably to a life of infamy. Infamy, they all got infamy. So a glorious death. So, right, okay, preferring a glorious death, committed suicide. Doesn't sound like a glorious death to me. According to Josephus, the Jews hoped that all their nation beyond the Euphrates would join together with them to raise an insurrection. But in the end, there were only 960 Jewish zealots who fought the Roman army at Masada. That was all. Because the Jews said, "Oh, well, wash our bloody hand of these lunatics," This was a Jewish way, you see, right? If you can live amongst a society and still practice your religion, that's got to be a good result. It's got to be, yeah. You can trade, you can trade amongst the Romans, you can be the money exchangers and all the rest of it, right? You're still not free. But then again, it's better than being slaves, do you know what I mean? And the Jewish community said, well, just leave them to it. Just leave them do their thing. And by the way, if they succeed, right, we'll join them, right? That's the usual thing, isn't it? If I tell you what, here's Richard, he sends me in to be a troublemaker, right? And if it works out, then he comes up in my rear. Highlight, Richard. Sorry, Richard. And then when Richard sorts out the highlight people, I back off then as well. Richard, when you get it sorted, I'll be behind you, all right? When these zealots were trapped on top of Masada with nowhere to run, Josephus tells us that the zealots believed it by the will of God and by necessity that they are to die. According to the translator of Josephus, 2 women who survived the suicide by hiding inside a cistern along with 5 children. At least they had something to drink. Elazar ben Yahir, apparently he gave a speech to those before the mass suicide. But then again, there's no real record of what that speech said. So it said, this is Elazar ben Yahir, who was the leader of the Jews at Masada. This is what he said: "Since we long ago resolved never to be servants to the Romans, nor to any other than to God himself, who alone is the true and just Lord of mankind, the time has now come that obliges us to make that resolution true in practice. We were the very first that revolted, and we are the last to fight against them. And I cannot but esteem it as a favour that God has granted us, that it is still in our power to die bravely and in a state of freedom." So in other words, he's saying, right, we started this rebellion, the rest of the bloody Jews didn't really join us, and they're not joining us now, and we are the real Jews. There you go. That's what's being said. right? As Judaism prohibits suicide, Josephus reported that the defenders had drawn lots and killed each other in turn, down to the last man who would be the only one to actually take his own life. So in other words, you cannot commit suicide as a Jew, except one person is going to have to, and that person will die in hell, but the rest of you will go to heaven, right? Knowing my luck, it'd be me, wouldn't it? Josephus says that Eleazar ben Jahir ordered his men to destroy everything except the foodstuffs to show that the defenders retained the ability to live, and so had chosen death over slavery. However, archaeological excavations have shown that storerooms which contained their provisions were also burned, though whether this was by the Romans, by Jews, by later events, or natural fire spreading is unclear. So I'm going to show you an image here. And this shows you of Roman ingenuity and power. So there's two things that this shows. Hang on a minute. Let's I got a screen share this. There you go. That ramp's quite pretty impressive, isn't it? And what we've got there's a couple of other things I can show you as well. What we've not only got, hang on, let me get my little annotation bars up here. What we've got the ramp going all the way up to the top. We've also got, if you have a good old look, we've got a Roman fort there. Look at that there. We've got a Roman fort there. We've got a bit of a defensive there. We've got another Roman fort there. They're bloody into their forts, aren't they? We've got another Roman fort over here as well. So what we've got this is completely defended. They wouldn't have been able to get out. But that there is the ramp. And it says here, the Roman siege ramp seen from above. This was partly built for a 1981 TV production. But there you go. This is the ramp itself. It's quite spectacular, really, that we're looking at that ramp. Anyway, back to where we were looking at with Masada again. Back to this image. So let's go back to my notes. So what we're really looking at is some really interesting bits of history, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through the slides and explain these slides, and I'm going to go back to the conclusion, really, because there is a bit of a confusion I need to bring us. Right, the site has been excavated, so we've got some archaeological evidence from the archaeological excavations in more recent years. So so here we go. I'm just double checking a little bit there. You know, that's really good. And let's just sort of go with these images. Right, so if we go from the beginning all the way back again, there we go. So we've got this wonderful rock there. That looks impregnable. That really does. And you're looking at this from an angle, right? And actually, what we do find is, I'm going to, hang on a minute. There's the ramp. Hang on. Oh, here we go. No, hang on a minute. Rub that out. It's in the wrong place. There's the ramp. Even when you look at the ramp, it's just like, bloody hell. That's quite a feat. You know, it's basically piling everything up to actually get in there. It's a real feat, that a real achievement, and obviously all the besieging forts around it. So again, going back to where Masada is here, and if you orientate this is the right way round. So that's north. Right, and as you're pointing, you're almost pointing towards the Dead Sea. So that's sort of more or less pointing northerly. So that's the westerly, and that's the easterly, and that's the south tip. And there's our Josephus. And again, if you orientate this again, it gives you an idea of the greatness of. Now, if this was a Crusader fortress, this would have been impregnable. the great Saladin would have never captured this fortress. It would have been impossible. You wouldn't have got any number of men up that wall, and it's not that wall, at that sheer face. And if you demolish the ramp and all the rest of it, it would have been, something you can imagine. But you can imagine this was built by Herod the Great in 30 odd years before the birth of Jesus Christ, and it was something that the Jews thought they could hold out in until help arrived, but it never ever did. Again, I've given you an idea of a Roman fort. Again, one of those Roman forts that was used, a number of Roman forts. I don't know exactly how many there were. The gang of archaeologists excavating there, and you can tell it's typically let me say typically 1950s excavation. These are the guys doing the work, and these are the guys who are there to oversee. And that looks like an army officer there on the left as well. So we'll just have a little sort of little look at this as well. And Richard, do you know when you see things that are confusing, right? That there says north, that says north, that says west, that says east. So why is that there, which also says north? So that's obviously pointing north that way, isn't it? So that's what we're looking at. So what we do find is that we do have water systems, so they got water storage there. So that's really important. So you've got the water systems, and you've got a palace here. You've got another little bit of a palace. So this is the place built for a great leader. And actually, that might be the ramp, but there's the entranceway, the snake path. That was actually the entranceway to get in. You can only get a donkey and whatever in up that way. You can't get two abreast, if you remember we saying that. So again, let's try and get to the end of these images, and we move on. And again, more of a nice little description, giving us an idea. And what we do find is that they have found some tablets there as well, and coins that they're describing, coins that have actually been found at the site, describing the Byzantine church as well, which is much later. There's bathing facilities, obviously. South of this, you've got the baths, you've got the snake path gate, which is how they would have entered this place. So there's a lot going on with this site, a great deal. And again, this sort of last image of a Roman fort. So what I'm going to do, we're going to sort of look at what all this means, the legacy of Masada. I will just call it a day. So the legacy of Masada, the siege of Masada, is often revered in modern Israel as a symbol of Jewish heroism. To others it isn't, as we've already explained. According to one of the writers, Masada became a symbol for a heroic last stand for the state of Israel and played a major role for Israel in forging national identity. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Whether you agree, if you're Jewish, whether Masada is a representation of symbolism, where the other side, where it sees a representation of the futile nature of some Jewish sects, but overall it's part of the identity. You can't deny that. You can't deny that it played a role in Jewish Israeli history. So from that point of view, it's important, whatever type of Jewish person you are. To Israel, it symbolized the courage of the warriors of Masada. Again, rewriting history. The strength they showed when they were able to keep hold of Masada for over 3 years. Now that's impressive. And their choice of death over slavery in their struggle against an aggressive empire, Masada had become the performance space for national heritage, the site of military ceremonies. The state today, the Israeli state, with all the agreement and disagreement over Masada, has developed a special love affair with the site and the archaeology that's telling us much more than Josephus wrote down. Because the site had drawn people from all around the world to help locate the remnants of the fortress and the battle that occurred there. Others, however, see it as a case of Jewish radicals refusing to compromise, resorting instead to suicide and the murder of their families, both prohibited by Judaism. Researchers are questioning the findings. The Israeli archaeologists who first excavated Masada was once a place of celebration for Israelis, but now Israelis become less comfortable with glorifying mass suicide and identified with religious fanatics. Other archaeologists have reviewed the findings of the archaeological excavations and have found some discrepancies. The earlier excavations, it's said that 3 bodies that were found there were Jewish zealots, some of the Saccharite. But it's said that these bodies themselves were actually 3 Romans taken hostage by the Jewish zealots. So in other words, the bodies glorifying the great fight and the great effort to resist the Romans, the 3 individuals that they found were actually Romans who actually died as hostages. So there's no glory there. If this is true, Israel might have mistakenly bestowed the honor of the recognition of Jewish heroes and a state of burial on 3 Romans. Very interesting. There is also some discussion of Masada's defenders and whether they were the heroic hardcore of the Jewish revolt against Rome or a gang of killers who became victims of a last Roman mopping up operation. And the last thing that I would say is, with all that said today, if Josephus had never written about Masada, those 3 bodies that were found at Masada who turned out to be Romans, and not knowing anything else, that would have given a completely different take on what Masada means to anybody. So what we're going to do, we're going to call that a day. Are there any questions? I can't hear any voices.
Huh?
Is it you I'm looking for?
There's a voice. Well, believe it or not, I took one of those cars that take you up the top.
All right.
Or that trolley, not a trolley car. What's it? Gondola. That's how they get the tourists up there now, a gondola. You don't have to walk up. You can.
Hang on, I thought a gondola was the type of thing that went in Athens or...
Yeah. I don't know. Anyhow, it takes you up there to the top so you can walk around. Hot and dusty is all I remember. And big, so.
The big question is, was there a shop?
The shop was down below. If you could stand the gondola, yeah. So,
Right, fair.
get all the different viewpoints and figure out what the history was, because I didn't understand it at the time,
Right. So
30 years ago.
So you know a little bit more now.
Yes, I know a little bit more now. Thank you so much. Yes.
That's good. Thank you for that, Pat. And anything from you, Richard, before we finish?
No, I've never heard of it before. So.
And you wouldn't have heard of it unless... Say that again?
I said it wasn't taught to me at school. So.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have heard of it unless Josephus wrote about it. That's the point.
Yeah.
And you just, and this is the very point. This is a very interesting thing. I said to Michelle a couple of days ago. I said, if time travel existed, if you could time travel, but no matter what you changed in the past, always reverted back to what happened. So say for example, you went back in time 100 years and you wiped out your own relatives. But in fact, it turns out that you didn't wipe out your own relatives and you actually turn up to where you are today. And you've got the idea that history was rewritten. There's no record of your events and all these other things, and what I'm trying to get at is so many things may have happened in the past and none of it was recorded. And there may have been many more events like Masada that haven't come down to us. And even if you could time travel and tell people about those events, they might not be recorded anyway. And there's lots of different ways of looking at things. When I was a child, there was an entertainer, as we know, called Rolf Harris. He no longer exists. And what I'm trying to say is that even though you do your best to record history, it can be easily lost and disregarded and lost in time. So, okay, then what we'll do, I'll see you next week. Hopefully Bill and Del and whoever will be back. And nothing else you want to say, Richard and Pat?
Nope, it's fine.
No.
Okay.
Very much.
Okay then. Okay. So, Richard, we'll think about that other thing for with the Friday and stuff. Okay, again.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
All right then. I'm gonna Pat and Richard. Obviously, Pat and Richard will no doubt you will be joining Jessica tonight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All
7
right,
o'clock.
7 o'clock. Okay, then, I get a dash now, so I'll see you soon.
All right, so long. Bye.
So long, Pat and Richard, and thanks for joining us.
Okay. Bye.
Good, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Richard. Bye. Bye. Thank you, YouTube, and thank you for joining us. And that was my presentation on a Wednesday, looking at the wonderful Romans anywhere in the world, and this is my sort of thing that I do. So thank you very much for joining me, and if you want to join us, you can do so. So I can put www.archaeologyonline.weebly.com. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Don't forget to subscribe and like.